Hi, I'm Paweł Spychalski and it's finally time to flash and flight Betaflight 4.3. Yes, I know it's not official yet, it's not released, however the development nightly builds are, well, let's say, because majority of the functionalities are already there, and to be honest, majority of the Betaflight community is probably already on the Betaflight 4.3. So today, in today's tutorial, we will flash the Betaflight latest development into my customized Diaton Roma F4 long range. We will configure it with my Immersion RC Ghost and with the DJI Digital FPV system, and then you will know how to flash Betaflight 4.3 hopefully in less than 20 minutes, and you will be able to be happy with the performance that this Betaflight release is giving you and will definitely give you in the future. So let's go. Before we proceed, I would like to thank all my Patreon and YouTube supporters for their backing. If you're not one of them, then please consider becoming one for as little as $2 a month. And now the safety precaution before doing anything with your drone, because we will be spinning motors on the workbench. Please remove the propellers, because with the propellers, spinning motor is the shortest way to have your fingers cut. Also, you will need a battery, because we will be, like I said, spinning motors, testing something out. USB cable that you will have to use to connect your Betaflight flight controller to your PC, and the latest version of the iNav configurator. Yes, you will have to get yourself also a nightly version of the Betaflight configurator. However, it's relatively simple, and let's begin with that part. If you will open Google and type Betaflight configurator nightly, the first link will give you exactly what you want. This is the Betaflight GitHub repository called Betaflight configurator nightlies that has the latest nightlies that you can download. You just have to go to the releases page and get yourself the exe file or Debian or zip or whatever, depending on the flight, on the operating system you are using on your PC. I'm using Windows 10, so I already downloaded Windows 64. Bear in mind, those nightlies are not signed. That means that your browser or the antivirus software can have some objections. Still, it's fine. Add it to the exclusions and you will be able to install the Betaflight configurator 1.10.8.0 and use it afterwards. Like I mentioned before, I already have the Betaflight configurator 10.8 something debug already installed, and it's working just fine. Bear in mind, it's a good idea to have the backup of your current configuration. To do it, just plug in your drone, your flight controller into the configurator, wait until the COM port will be displayed, connect, go to the CLI, type diff or dump. I usually stick with diff, and do save to file. Thanks to this, you will be able to save the configuration you have right now, and if anything will go wrong, you will be able to, well, basically to roll back. However, we will not be doing that in details today because everything will of course work, so let me just disconnect, and now it's time to put our flight controller into the DFU mode. DFU mode, aka the bootloader mode, allows you to flash your STM32 flight controller. There are two ways of doing that: the hardware way and the software way. I personally prefer the hardware way, so just find a small button on your flight controller, press it, and while keeping it pressed, plug in the USB cable into the controller. And if we right now will go into the configurator, you will notice that the DFU STM32 bootloader was detected. Now let's go to the firmware flasher, and because we want to basically flash the nightlies of the Betaflight, we will have to make sure that show unstable releases is on, enable expert mode is on, and in this drop down you have development branch selected. Now all you have to do is type the name of the target you will be flashing to. I'm using the Matek F722 Mini SE, and this is already pre-selected, and the latest nightly for this flight controller, well, is exactly from today. So Now, because I personally think that updating with full flash erase is the way to go, I have already this thing selected. That means that all the configuration you had previously on your flight controller will be erased, but don't worry, we have a backup, so if anything will go wrong, we can always restore. And with this done, click Load firmware online. You will see the identification and all the other stuff that it's not really very important at this moment, and hit Flash firmware. First, the configurator will erase the flash and then it will upload the new version of the firmware to your flight controller. When the flashing is done, it's time to connect to the board and start the configuration. Yes, we do want to apply the custom defaults, because those are the defaults that will tell Betaflight how your motors are connected, how everything is running, and without custom defaults it will rather not work. So yeah, we apply custom defaults and wait for the magic to happen. After magic happened, let's hit connect again, and another dialog, another thing. We have the accelerometer on this board, however the Betaflight detected that it was not calibrated, so we will have to do it to be able to use any of the accelerometer using flight modes. So let's just close the dialog, and here on the setup tab, click the calibrate accelerometer. Betaflight is calibrating only one axis of the accelerometer, so it's a relatively simple and fast process. There is nothing really to it. The next step would be to set up serial ports. I have something like a custom configuration of what is connected where in my drone, so the default unfortunately does not work for me. It might work for you, but not for me. First of all, I have the serial receiver Ghost connected to a serial port 1. Then I have the DJI FPV system connected to the serial port 4, so that means I have to enable the MSP on the serial port 4, and I have the GPS connected to the serial port 2. So in the sensor input I have to select GPS, and I have to of course hit save and reboot to persist the changes. After this is done, we can go and check the first element if our serial receiver is working and is connected. Like I said, I'm using Ghost protocol and the Ghost receiver, so I do have to check for the ERC Ghost protocol selected over here. Hit save and reboot, and while the flight controller is rebooting, let me turn on my radio so we will be able to see if everything works, and also plug in the battery to the drone, because my receiver is connected on, is powered only when the battery is on. So let's connect, let's go to the receiver tab, and let's see if the radio is working. Yes, the radio is working. We have the nicely input signal, so one thing done, we can continue to do other stuff. Next, I'm also using the GPS because like I mentioned, I already configured the GPS on the serial port 2, so because I would like to be able to use the GPS rescue, I have to go to the configuration tab, scroll down and enable the GPS. You have the option, usually have the option either to use NMEA protocol or the U-blocks. If you have the U-blocks, then use the U-blocks because it's much better. Select autoconfig, autobot. If you are somewhere in the Europe, it's also a good idea to select use Galileo, but we will not be doing in this run. So after this is done, let's hit save and reboot. You hear the board is kinda loud where it's rebooting. Let's connect again, and the GPS icon is right now yellow, and because the GPS was already connected for a few minutes already, we have the 3D fix through some satellites and the position, so everything is almost great. Now when this is gone, let's go to the extremely important aspect of the configuration, which is the failsafe. This is the setup part when we tell the Betaflight what to do when you have fail-saved, when the receiver is no longer working, the drone is not receiving any valid information, and we have option drop, land or GPS rescue. Well, we have the GPS, and this is kind of long range-ish, maybe not long range, but long range-ish drone, so I will want to use the GPS rescue, so let me just select that. Bear in mind the default ground speed 20 meters per second is, well, kind of fast-ish, but I think it will be fine. In this application we do not really want to have very detailed speed control and precise landing. Well, there is no landing. Even if you will go to something like 10 meters per second, the GPS should have no problem with getting the correct ground heading, and everything should work. However, like I mentioned, the defaults should be fine. Bear in mind, Betaflight for the GPS rescue does not require you the magnetometer, so I'm not even configuring the magnetometer on. I'm leaving this thing off. So save and reboot. Let's connect again, and now it's time to configure our motors and other cool thingies. The motor and other cool thingies are of course in the motors tab, which is a nice step forward from having everything in the configuration tab. So we have to choose either the mixer type. I'm using Quad X, yes, because the 99.9% probably are the Quad X's, and I'm also using the standard motor order because this is how the wires from the flight controller to the ESC are connected. Motor 1, motor 2, motor 3, motor 4. However, bear in mind that my quad is set up for the props out. That means that I do have to select motor direction is reversed. That means the propellers will be rotating opposite to the default setting. We will not be doing anything before persisting this configuration change, so let's just save and reboot. Connect again and go to the motors one more time. ESC protocol. DSHOT 600. DSHOT 600 is great. All the standard ESCs are right now supporting this thing. We definitely do not want to enable motor stop because motor stop on the freestyle or long range drones is something extremely bad. We are also not enabling the ESC sensor over the separate wire. Instead, we will enable the bidirectional DSHOT, which will allow for the RPM telemetry to be transmitted from the ESC to the flight controller so that the Betaflight can correctly set up the RPM filter. Yes, okay, this is exactly what we wanted to do. Let's one more time save and reboot. And after that is done, probably our last visit to the motors tab, we will be able to see if the bidirectional DSHOT is actually working, if everything is enabled. So I removed the propellers, so never do it with the propellers on. I understand the risk, and let me start spinning the motors. Everything is great. The RPM from the motors is correctly reported over the bidirectional DSHOT. The error rate is low. Everything is almost ready and prepared. Bear in mind, when one day you will have to reconfigure motor direction or the reorder motors, Betaflight now has the nice wizards located over here that will allow you to do it. However, we will not be doing that today because, like I mentioned, my drone is just fine, and maybe one day I will record a specific videos only about those two buttons. Next, as the motors are correctly configured and you can play if everything is working on the workbench, if the motors are rotating in the correct directions, let's go to modes tab because, well, we would like to be able to arm and fly. I will be configuring today only very limited set of flight modes, beginning with the arm. I do not use the pre-arm because I usually take care of what I'm doing. So I will be configuring the arm on the AUX2 channel, and everything, this is the 3-position switch, and everything besides the top will be drone armed. And the nice feature of the Betaflight is that it pre-detects what's happening, so when you will just flip the switch, it will detect which switch you want to have this thing on. Okay, arm disabled, fantastic, but we do not want to arm right now. I'm not configuring any angle mode or anything like that. However, I will want to have the GPS rescue, just to be in the safe place. So I will add the range and move the switch on the radio that will, in my case, activate the GPS rescue, which will be the AUX1. Set the range correctly to detect this, and now I will of course turn it on, and I will also want to be able to have the beeper on one of the switches, AUX3 in this case. Fantastic, outstanding on the mid position. as you can see, it's even working. And I also would like to be able to have the Blackbox on the AUX4, no, this is Polish, I'm speaking English today, AUX4. I one more time have to set the correct range, and this is all. Right now, most probably we have everything for the basic setup of the Betaflight flight modes configured. Everything is most probably working just like expected, and we can proceed to other aspect, to the OSD. Because I'm using the DJI FPV system, the OSD will be somehow limited. By default, Betaflight gives you warnings and the messages section. However, because this is not so much supported by the DJI, we can safely get rid of that, and instead I will put on the OSD, on the DJI Digital OSD, only the elements I really am interested during flight. First of all, the battery voltage on all of the three OSD profiles, and I will have it in this place. I will want to have also the, what will I want to have? I will want to have the information about the number of SATs of the GPS, because this is usually useful. I will want to have the GPS speed somewhere here, and of course I will want to have latitude and the longitude, so if anything will happen, I will be able to more or less know where the drone is. No, DJI does not store the OSD in the DVR, however, when the connection is lost, the goggles persist the last known location, so it will be fine. Also, home direction is extremely useful thing, because, well, you do want to know where you want to go, and the home distance, as you know, how much you actually flew. Where is the home distance? Oh yeah, here is the home distance. I also like to have one timer somewhere in the bottom right corner, so I know for how long I'm flying. And because I can configure the timer 1, I want to set the timer 1 to total armed time. This time, when I arm and rearm, I will be able for how long the drone was basically in the air. And for the minimum setup of what is required for the OSD in the DJI HD version, this is, I think, all. There is a font manager. You can flash your custom fonts, but because the OSD is rendered by the goggle, you will really not see what's happening over there. So let's just save, and well, another part done. After OSD is done, let's go quickly to the power and battery section. Usually there is not a need to reconfigure voltage meters, because all the flight controllers are basically shipped with the correct configuration. However, it's a good idea to check with the ESC the current sensor configuration of how much the current scale should be applied. You can get it usually from the data sheets, and if the data sheet it's not present, then what you can do is to have the custom calibration for your current sensor. I have the separate video about this. We will not be covering this part today, because it really makes no sense, because we are not doing anything. Then let's just say that power and battery is done. One day I will make probably the video about the calibration in Betaflight, but this is not today. And finally it's time to set up the PID controller. If you do not have the settings you would like to migrate, I personally am somewhere in the position that when you are migrating between the major versions, you should actually start from defaults and tune from that. There is not really much that you can do over there, because defaults enable you almost everything that you have to have. There is option to use the sliders. Not today, we will not cover the sliders today. We only have to really be verified that the feed forward is on, that the item relax is on, and the demin. There are different, let's say, views of if you should use demin or not. However, my idea is, yes, keep the demin on by default when you will be tuning your quad slightly later, you might check how it will fly without the demin on and only with the standard Dmax, well, in this situation will behave. So nothing really to change on the PID profile settings. On the rate profile, well, this is slightly more interesting because we are finally going into the rate tuning of how fast you want your drone to rotate when you deflect the stick to the max. By default, Betaflight 4.3 comes with the actual rates. Well, finally, no more guessing what something means. In the actual rates, you only set up the max rate for each axis. Defaults are 670 degrees per second on every of the axes, and this is really a personal preference. I usually prefer something slightly faster than that. On the roll pitch, I'm usually going with 750, and I also usually do not really touch the expo that much, maybe to some slide of the expo, but like I said, this is the personal preference and you will basically have to figure out of how much expo you like. Bear in mind, there is expo applied on the default because the curve over there is basically a curve. If not expo at all on the rate, the line would be flat. And now if I will move the stick, then we will move the simulator rates preview will tell us how fast we will be rotating. I'm also not changing anything about throttle limits on TPA breakpoints, anything like that. This is not important in this very specific moment. And now let's go to the filter setting one more time. We will be flying defaults. We will not be enabling anything besides the defaults. Definitely we will not be enabling static gyro notch filters because this is no, this is so old, and we will hold the standard PT1 on the gyro. However, with the latest Betaflight, you have the option not only to select PT1 B quad, but also PT2 and PT3, but we will cover this thing in a slightly later. Dynamic notch filter enabled by default, nothing really to change over there. D-term enabled by default with the values that really should fit nicely, everything between 4 and 7 inches and even 3 and 7 inches without absolutely any problem. Without having a very specific tune you want to apply, I don't think there is really a need to configure something before flying this thing. When you will experience some problems, when you will have the oscillations, when something will be happening, then we will go into the filters. For today, we only want to take it off from the ground and see how this thing is flying. So one more time, we will leave everything at the defaults and of course hit save. Oh, I forgot about something. We also have to kind of figure out if our accelerometer, the board orientation is correct. To do it, we have to go to the setup tab and start moving your drone. If the image follows basically your movements, that means that the orientation is correct, and is correct in this case because when I raise the nose of the quad, the nose of the model is also going up. If this is however not true and the model is not following the real movement, you have to go to the configuration tab and set up the board alignment, usually only with the yaw axis. If for example you pitch up but the model is rolling right, you have to modify the yaw degrees to either 90 or the 270. I don't want to do the math right now in my head, but this is relatively simple process and there are no really much things to do. And of course, please do remember, save and reboot after you change something. And this, my friends, is basically all that you really have to do to flash and initially configure Betaflight 4.3 on the drone. In my case, on this small 4-inch long ranger, but this is all that you really had to do. Have you noticed that really majority of the options are there by there are there by default, and in most of the cases we never really had to touch any specific settings, because the times when the defaults were awful and you were not able to fly on the defaults are long gone, and the process of installing Betaflight is getting simpler and simpler every release. Now everything that is left is to, well, one more time verify if the motors are spinning in the correct direction, to put on propellers, to go to your favorite flying spot and start flying. Thank you very much for watching. Until the next one, and happy flying!